Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Arundhati Ramanan and here are the headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. Global markets on tenterhooks after US and China trade conflict flares up once again. Stocks edge higher in Europe after President Trump signals openness to dialogue, claiming it will all be fine. Trump also warns China's export control on rare earths is a major barrier to talks. Indian officials will head to Washington for trade talks. Sources highlight good progress in negotiations. Both sides are hopeful of concluding the first tranche of the trade deal by fall. Sensex and Nifty end with marginal losses after a late recovery. Mid-caps and bank stocks bucked the downtrend to end in the green. Cryptocurrencies rebound after witnessing the largest liquidation in history over the weekend. The industry saw liquidations to the tune of over $18 billion over the weekend on the back of an escalation in US-China trade tensions. Relief and jubilation across Israel and Gaza as hostages start returning home after 2 years of captivity. Hamas claims all living captives have been freed. Israel approves the release of over 1,700 Palestinian prisoners. U.S. President Trump lands in Tel Aviv amid hostage release, declares that the Gaza war is over. Tata Capital makes a muted debut on the Lal Street shares list at a premium of 1.2% over the issue price. Its 15,500 crore rupee issue was India's largest IPO of 2025. Zoho founder Sridhar Vembu calls Aratai, their newly launched messaging app, a contrarian bet, calls the migration of email accounts of central government employees to Zoho platform the start of a Swadeshi awakening, calls for regulations of global capability centers so that innovation developed by Indian talent benefits the country, says the AI bubble could burst. The ruling NDA finalizes seat sharing ahead of Bihar Assembly elections. For the first time since 2005, BJP, placed on an equal footing with Nitish Kumar's JDU, will contest 101 seats each. Chirag Paswan's party will contest 29 seats. The India bloc is expected to finalize their seat-sharing pact today. The top story moving the markets worldwide, the fragile trade truce between the United States and China has been broken. Beijing has launched a barrage of measures over the last few days, rankling Washington. Stock market slumped soon after the retaliation resumed. U.S. bonds tumbled, cryptos crashed, and crude oil prices plunged nearly 5%. Here is a quick look at the sequence of events over the last 2 months that has brought the world's two major economies back on the brink of a trade war once again. On the 11th of August, US and China agreed to extend their trade truce by 90 days. Things were calm for nearly a month, but after that. But on the 4th of September, US asked European Union to impose 50 to 100% tariffs on China for buying Russian oil. A few days later on, the 15th of September, things looked upbeat after Washington and Beijing agreed on a framework for a deal over TikTok's US business. But on the same day, China launched an antitrust probe against US semiconductor giant NVIDIA, alleging abuse of market dominance. 4 days later, things looked bright once again as President Trump and President Xi held a phone call and agreed to meet each other at the end of October in South Korea at the sidelines of the APEC summit. On the 24th of September, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Boeing aircraft parts and some chemicals will be important leverage for the U.S. in negotiations with China. On the 1st of October, President Trump said declined soybean purchases by China will be a major topic of discussion when he meets Xi Jinping. On the 7th of October, U.S. lawmakers sought a ban on exporting semiconductor making equipment to China after detecting sales worth millions of dollars in the last 1 year. On the 9th of October, China expanded export controls on rare earths, announcing it will take effect from the 8th of November. All hell broke loose on the 10th of October, with China increasing port fees on American vessels and hitting tech company Qualcomm with a new antitrust probe. President Trump announced 100% tariffs on China, which will take effect from the 1st of November. China is using rare earths as leverage since it controls 90% of all rare earths being refined worldwide. The U.S. has also ramped up the tariffs, which many trade economists say amounts to a trade embargo. Washington has also threatened to block exports of critical software. So what's next? Both leaders could meet on the sidelines of the APEC meeting in South Korea later this month. The measures announced by both nations will kick in only from November, and many experts are hopeful of a deal before that. President Trump also sounded upbeat about the prospects of a truce.
I think we're going to be fine with China. Look, I have a great relationship with President Xi. He's a very tough man. He's a very smart man. He's a great leader for their country. He's a great leader. And I have a great relationship with him. I think we'll get it set. I know what happened. I really understand what happened. And I'm not even saying he's wrong. But then we met him with something much tougher than what he did to us. Again, because of the tariffs, it's much tougher.
On to the day's market action. Dalal Street ended mixed but sharply off lows. Nifty and Sensex closed the day in the red, but Nifty managed to hold at 25,200 mark. Broader markets outperformed the blue chips. On to the commodity market. Bullion continued its golden run as investors looked for safe haven amidst U.S. President Donald Trump renewed tariff threats against China. Expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will interest rate cuts only added to the yellow metals allure. Gold prices have surged nearly 50% so far in 2025. Silver also jumped to an all-time peak, tracking gold's rally. From commodities through cryptos, which have recovered marginally after witnessing the largest liquidation in history over the weekend. The industry saw liquidations to the tune of over $18 billion over the weekend on the back of an escalation in US-China trade tensions. Manisha Gupta is here with all of those details. Manisha, what triggered the sell-off?
Well, it continues to be very, very volatile for the crypto as an overall market. While we have seen some sanity, some rebound happening after that very heavy sell-off that we saw over the weekend, but we are nowhere near the prices before this liquidation happened. Well, Trump threatening China that it would launch another additional 100% tariffs on Chinese goods really led to prices coming off. And that was across asset classes. So whether it was about currencies or commodities, we saw equity markets decline quite sharply. Remember, the U.S. equities saw the steepest decline in 6 months that you saw in that one day. And that's exactly what we saw in case of cryptos as well. So when you look at the overall markets there, Bitcoin was trading at 115. Before this decline, it went all the way down to 103,000. Now, this is nearly 9 to 10% of a decline coming in. Ethereum, which is the second largest crypto in sense of market cap, fell from 4,400 to 3,750. That's a 15% decline. And then you had something like a Solana falling from 223 to 178, which is almost a 20% decline. So it has been very, very sharp declines coming in. When you look at the overall number, then the total liquidations that crypto saw was to the tune of $18.3 billion. Now, this is the largest one-day decline ever in the history that we have seen in sense of liquidation come in for crypto. And within this as well, it was nearly $5 billion of a liquidation in Bitcoin that we saw, $4 billion in Ether, $2 billion in Solana, and then various other cryptos as well. If you look at the prices in the last 1 week or 1 month, we seem to be trading in the negative right now. And within this as well, it's only Bitcoin which has declined the least. If you look at the others, it's anywhere between 10 to 30% of a decline in many of these cryptos that we are clocking in for the last 1 month. But then again, if you look at the last 1 year, it is double-digit to triple-digit gains that many of these cryptos seem to be offering. Bitcoin is up 75% in last 1 year. You have Ethereum up 60%. You have Ripple, Cardano, Binance giving you triple-digit returns as well in the last 1 year. So the near-term volatility clearly seems to be very, very high right now, and much depends upon the kind of developments and statements that we hear from global markets.
Right, Manisha, many thanks for those details. Now, the big macro data of the month, retail inflation eased to 1.54% in September. This is the lowest reading in more than 8 years. Lata Venkatesh is here with all of those details to decode those numbers for us. Lata?
Well, it's as per the CNBC-TV18 poll. Our poll had thrown up about 1.55 thereabouts. It's coming in at 1.54. One should remember that this is way lower than the Reserve Bank's mandate, which is to keep the inflation between 2 and 6%. Basically, keep the inflation at 4% plus or minus 2. It is below the lower bound, and that's very significant. The reason for this is primarily food prices. Food prices have fallen with a thud. It is the 4th month of negative YOY food prices. That is a fall in food prices. It is minus 2.28% lower, the food inflation for the month of September. As you can see that we are in negative terrain all the way from June. And, if you look at individual items, there's practically nothing that has risen except a little bit of rise in fruit. Otherwise, cereals have fallen month on month very sharply. And, of course, year on year as well, we have a fairly big... cereals, pulses are important because they're an important source of protein, that's down minus 15% year on year. Cereals up 2%, meat and fish up 2%, egg up 2.7%. I mean, none of the food items are up more than about 2%, and many of them are down double digits year on year. So this is a significant reduction in food inflation. It will not even end here because, we have a very big base effect coming up in October as well. And therefore, we are going to see definitely another month, if not couple of months, of negative food inflation numbers. The one that's pushed up the inflation a little bit, taking away the negative impact of food, is core inflation. That's coming at about 4.5%. It's a little difficult to talk about core inflation because many people have a different view on what you should include in core. Basically, services are included in core. What is not importable is included in core. It's non-food, non-fuel prices that are included in core, and that's up 4.5%. The reason why it's up is because year ago, core inflation was very low. It was 3.5%, and therefore the low base also makes the core inflation look big. Now, what is the other big takeaway other than the low food inflation from these numbers? The average. If you take July, August, September, the Reserve Bank always forecasts the average. The average it forecast for July, August, September in the previous policy was 1.8%, which was a big drop from some 2.7% that was the previous forecast. It had brought it down drastically. And guess what? Now, after we get the September number, the average has fallen to 1.7. So inflation is undershooting the already drastically cut forecast of the Reserve Bank at 1.7%. The expectation is the October inflation is going to be even lower than this 1.54. It is expected to be about 0.6 or 0.7%. So when the Reserve Bank goes into the monetary policy on December 6th, they will have two inflation readings, both of which will be seriously below the lower bound of their inflation mandate of 2%. So guess what they will do? The market expectation, of course, is a repo rate cut.
All right, Lata, many thanks for taking us through those details. Now, trade negotiations between India and the US are likely to happen this week. Sources have said both sides are hopeful that the first tranche of the trade deal will be concluded by the fall deadline. Remember, the Trump administration has imposed 50% tariffs on India, making it the highest tariffs in the world. Shivani Bajaj joins us now with the details. Shivani, what are your sources telling you?
Well, yes, it seems like India's trade engagement with the United States is picking up pace again. A high-level Indian trade team is heading to the Washington, D.C. This week for the next round of discussions on the proposed bilateral trade agreement. This is what Commerce Ministry sources have told CNBC-TV18. So far, 5 rounds of talks have already been held, the last one being in mid-July. And sources say that the progress has been good. Sources in the Commerce Ministry say that both sides are now pushing to finalize the first tranche of the deal by fall deadline, which is October-November 2025, with key focus areas including market access, tariff rationalization and supply chain cooperation. Sources also say that India is now looking at buying more renewable energy from the United States. Now, this development also comes at a time when the new US ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, has finally landed in India. He's known to be close to the United States President Donald Trump, and his appointment is being seen as a signal of continued political will to strengthen the bilateral ties between the two countries. Over the weekend, Gore met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, and other senior officials in the Indian government, underscoring the importance both countries are placing on trade, investment, and strategic cooperation. Back to you.
Right, Shivani, many thanks for those details. And speaking of trade negotiations, government sources have said that India and the European Union have made good progress in terms of trade talks. However, issues on auto, agriculture and steel continue to remain unresolved. On that note, it is time for us to head into a short break. But coming up next, Donald Trump makes a historic visit to Israel as the Gaza peace plan gets underway. Israeli hostages start returning home after 2 years. Trump gets a standing ovation at the Israeli parliament. That and more on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still with us on Business 360. The Tata Trust is now divided on taking Tata Sons private. Tata Sons is the holding company of the conglomerate in which Tata Trust owns a 66% stake. The RBI designated Tata Sons as an upper-layer non-banking financial company which mandates public listing. But Tata Sons has applied for an exemption and that application is currently under review. Parikshit Luthra is here with all of those details. Parikshit?
Tata Trust, which has always owned a 66% stake in Tata Sons, has maintained that Tata Sons should remain a private entity. It should never get listed. However, in light of the recent tensions and rift between the trustees of the Tata Trust and the removal of Vijay Singh, some trustees are now of the opinion that it might be better for Tata Sons to get listed. Now, Tata Sons has a valuation of $180 billion. They've always had reservations against public listing, but now some of the trustees, we're told by sources close to the Tata Group, are in agreement with the Shapoorji Pallonji Group, which has recently reiterated that Tata Sons should get listed for the sake of transparency and public accountability. Now, the Shapoorji Pallonji Group owns an 18.3% stake in Tata Sons. They've long maintained that a public listing is necessary. Even though there was a resolution a few months ago by all the trustees, and that was passed unanimously, that Tata Sons should be kept private, the recent tensions within the trustees is making people question the resolution and say that perhaps it's time to get a public listing done. While the Tata Sons has paid off its debt of 30,000 crores and they have surrendered their NBFC license, it is up to the RBI to accept this or not. For the moment, the RBI has not said anything on the matter, whether they accept the application to deregister or not. So the final word is still awaited from the RBI. But clearly now there are differences within the Tata Trust about keeping Tata Sons private. And this is a very important step because there are differences over how Tata Sons should be governed, what should be the role of Tata Trusts, and what should be the role of Tata Sons as well. And because of the differences and issues related to corporate governance that some trustees are raising, there are now questions about public listing. Let's see what happens in the days to come.
We'll have to wait and see what happens there. All right, Parikshit, many thanks for those details. Moving on, Zoho founder Sridhar Vembu has called Arattai, their newly launched messaging app, a contrarian bet. Speaking to Shireen Bhan, Vembu called the migration of email accounts of central government employees to Zoho platform the start of a Swadeshi awakening. He has also called for regulations of global capability centers so that innovation developed by Indian talent benefits the country.
Nearly 2 years ago, the government, the NIC, selected Zoho after a very long, arduous process of evaluation, a lot of audits, over 18 audits performed, and it was selected, and it is now already serving a fairly large number of users within the government, I believe about 1.5 million now, and growing. So this happened well before this current episode. Now, how did we arrive at this moment? It's basically, I call it the Swadeshi awakening we are going through. And I've been part of the whole Swadeshi movement, Swadeshi technology movement for a while now. In fact, I am very proud to be associated with the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and Sri Sundaramji from Madurai. And I've actually had long conversations about the need for technology self-reliance in India.
And you can catch the entire conversation right here at 6 p.m. on CNBC-TV18. The big international story we're tracking this evening, all of the remaining living Israeli hostages in Gaza have been released by Hamas and are back in Israel after 2 years of war. A group of 13 hostages were escorted across the border by the Israeli military after a group of 7 hostages was released earlier. Relief and jubilation gripped Israel and its capital of Tel Aviv as thousands of people gathered at Hostages Square. The square has acted as an encampment for families of hostages after Hamas's attacks on the 7th of October 2 years years ago. Meanwhile, several residents of Khan Yunis in Gaza City also filled streets in the anticipation of the return of the 1,700 Palestinian hostages held in Israel. People also surrounded the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis to welcome the hostages. Israel has approved the release of the Palestinian prisoners, which is set to follow after the release of 28 dead Israeli hostages. As part of the first phase of the U.S. ceasefire agreement, 250 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences will also be released. U.S. President Donald Trump declared that the war in the Middle East was over before his trip to the region to finalize a peace deal for Gaza. The president reached Israel earlier this morning as the hostages were released. He was welcomed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before heading to Israel's parliament. The president received a standing ovation before addressing members of the Knesset. He also spent time with some of the families of the hostages.
Citizens of Israel, my brothers and sisters, this is an emotional evening, an evening of tears, an evening of joy, because tomorrow, sons will return to their borders. This is a historic event that blends sorrow over the release of murderers and joy over the return of hostages. It is a historic event that some believed would never happen. But our fighters believed, many in our nation believed, and I believed.
The U.S. president will travel from Israel to Egypt later today, where world leaders from over 20 countries will gather for the Gaza Peace Summit. President Trump and Egypt's president will chair the summit. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has already arrived in Egypt for the summit, which will be attended by many leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron. Prime Minister Modi declined the invitation from Egypt given the short notice. India will be represented by Minister of State for External Affairs Kirti Vardhan Singh. And with that, it is a wrap on this edition of Business 360. More news and updates continue on the other side. Stay tuned.